Hello everyone, I'm Ben Johnson and this is the Perpetual Chess Podcast. On Perpetual Chess, I have weekly conversations with chess players, personalities, authors, and adult improvers about their lives, their careers, and about chess improvement. Perpetual Chess is brought to you through the generosity of its Patreon and PayPal supporters. For more information, go to perpetualchesspod.com. Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of Perpetual Chess, Chess Books Recaptured. So before we get to this week's book and bring in this month's co-host, just a couple items of the proverbial housekeeping. Number one is I'm trying to record this on a different platform. I know occasionally people are a little frustrated with the audio quality of Perpetual Chess at times. So I'm trying a more expensive platform that may or may not have better audio quality. So please let me know if it makes a difference to you. If you notice no difference at all, or if it sounds appreciably better, please let me know. One thing I would want to mention is just when we do the Skype interviews, obviously the sound quality is variable based on the guests to begin with. Like, for example, the most recent episode to air was with Terry Chapman. Terry is one of the few guests who I've done where I call him on a landline. That happens every once in a while. And when that happens, it sounds a little bit different. I don't think the sound is too bad, but those I will still be doing on Skype. And then, of course, guests from India, Basim Amin from Egypt, sometimes the farther away places with different internet capabilities, the sound can be different. And then there's always just random things at times too. So anyway, I know the sound is variable to begin with, but if this sound is especially good to you, please let me know. Or if you can't tell the difference, that's good to know too. So that's the minor thing out of the way. I also just wanted to quickly mention the coronavirus. This is the first episode I'm recording since things really escalated. So first of all, I hope you guys are all holding up well, both from a health perspective and from a mental health perspective. I know it's a hard time for a lot of people. There's a lot of change in my work family life as well. I'm home with my kids a lot more now. I'm started homeschooling them yesterday. I'm hoping it won't impact the podcast too much, but I may be a little bit less consistent. I may occasionally be a day or two late, which I wouldn't be under normal circumstances. And I don't know if I'll have as much preparation time for guests, to be honest. A lot of my hours are being spent with my kids that previously weren't, which, there's some good things about it too. I'm definitely going to keep the podcast going. I love doing this and happy about the trajectory, but just wanted to warn you guys about that. And the other thing is, I don't know how much time you guys will have to listen. I know that your lives are all a lot different all of a sudden. So no one's commuting, which is when I listen to a lot of my podcasts. But you also might have more free time, depending on your family and work situation. So anyway, just wanted to wish you guys the best and acknowledge that that's going on in the world. And we'll keep you posted about that. So with all that out of the way, getting on to Perpetual Chess, Chess Books Recaptured. For those of you who haven't heard it before, we take a break from interviewing people to recap a beloved chess book. This month, we will be discussing The Road to Chess Improvement by GM Alex Yermolinksy. He is a beloved and super strong grandmaster here in the U.S. Here on Perpetual Chess, I know that Grandmaster Jan Ludwig Hammer mentioned this book, as he mentioned that he was a big fan of this book. I am John Watson, who is a great book reviewer, great chess historian, great player in his heyday, called it an exceptional chess book. So it's probably not as well known as some of the other books we talked about, but it is quite beloved by many. And my guest co-host this month is a friend of the podcast, an active adult improver, a chess teacher, a chess content creator. He's written articles for Chessable and US Chess Online. He is rated about 1850, and I am finally going to let him talk. Bryan Castro, how are you?
Hey, Ben. Thanks a lot for having me on, and I am all of those things that you tell me, and some more, I suppose, as well.
Yeah. Well, do you want to just mention a few more things, your day job, where you live, stuff like that, just to give people a little more flavor of where you're coming from, Bryan?
Yeah, sure. I am a business person. I work in the financial services industry. I also have 3 children, so a very busy family life, as you mentioned, with the coronavirus. The kids are now at home, and I'm also trying to work more from home so that I'm not, of course, spreading any or being exposed to things. But in any case, in all of that, I do try to spend a little time studying chess and playing chess here and there. So it's something where I learned as a child. My father taught me how to play chess, but I didn't really get serious or get the chess bug until I was in college and found out that there was this thing called the U.S. Chess Federation where you can get a actual rating. So I started buying chess books and doing all of those things. It was also the early days of the Internet Chess Club, and started playing a lot of blitz there. I think I probably missed a few classes here and there, doing a blitz session. But and then as I got into the work life and having children, kind of like probably many adults that you've talked to, kind of gone away from chess for a little while, and then come back. It keeps calling me back. So I'm back. I've been playing actively or trying to play actively and study actively for the last, I would say, year and a half. So I think that pretty much sums it up for me.
Excellent. Well, Bryan, first of all, thanks for not bailing on this podcast with the coronavirus stuff. I know that, like you said, everyone's life is in a bit of upheaval. And I certainly would have understood if things had become too intense. But on the other hand, we both had read this book. So in a sense, that's the hardest part.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And
definitely.
and Bryan, I have my own history with this book, which I'll get to in a minute, but why did you, so you were one of the people that graciously volunteered to guest co-host and suggested a handful of books that you'd be happy to talk about. And why is it that this was one that you felt would be good to discuss?
Well, it's kind of interesting. It was published around 1999, and that's around when I started playing rated chess. So I probably picked up the book probably in the late 2000. I was probably rated around 1500 or so. And I actually lived in Cleveland at the time. And I believe at the time there was a slight overlap, although I never met him in person, where Grandmaster Yermolinksky actually lived in Cleveland as well. Although on the podcast, I think he didn't have glowing reviews of his time there. So I thought, well, this is kind of cool. And I saw his book. And at the time, too, I was very into reading kind of self-improvement books like Jim Rohn and Tony Robbins and Brian Tracy type of books. And so I kind of saw this as sort of the chess version, someone who is trying to better his chess and a grandmaster nonetheless. So I just really fell in love with his authenticity when I started reading through the book. He was really honest about his shortfalls, and as you can see, obviously he's a grandmaster and a U.S. champion, so he's very strong as well. So it was very refreshing, as opposed to seeing kind of a best games collection that is, doesn't, it makes it seem like the players never make any mistakes.
Yeah, I echo that sentiment. And the podcast interview that Bryan referred to is on episode 15, in very early days of Perpetual Chess. GM Yermolinksky was nice enough to join me. And I'd always been a fan of his, as I'll explain more about in a minute. So I definitely, if you want to know more about this Grandmaster, you should go back and listen. I actually re-listened to the interview. I mean, he's a very likable guy. He's one of these Soviet emigres who pulls no punches, just tells it like he sees it, and he's got a sense of humor. But the reason I was especially drawn to this book, and the reason I had read this book when it came out, is the guy was just a crusher. In my sort of heyday as a up and coming scholastic player, I grew up in Philadelphia, and he was playing the sort of continental chess, the professional circuit here in the United States. And he just won so many tournaments. And back in those days, the world was less flat. The internet hadn't fully taken hold. So even these guys who were not world champions, I think Yermo peaked around number 50 in the world, something like that. They just seem so mythical. It just seems so unfathomable to me to be playing in these tournaments like the World Open and the New York Open and the US Championship and just beating everyone. So he was, and I felt like I knew nothing about him at the time. I mean, I think that was more common then, where the top players seem farther away. So I was excited to read his book when it came out in 1999, and I already had it on my shelf when Bryan suggested it. So I am rolling with the original book version, Gambit Publications, 1999. And Bryan, what about you?
I also have the 99 version, and some of the pages kind of fall out occasionally, but yes, it's still held up over the years.
Yeah, it's in better shape than most of my 20-year-old chess books, I have to say, even though, of course, it has like my highlights and stuff like that. But it's not falling apart. The book is also available on Kindle for $10. So excellent value. And of course, we're going to dig more into the book. But I will say, certainly anyone listening to this can get something out of this. So let's dig into the zeitgeist of when the book was published. In 1999, I mentioned that Yermo was one of the top players in the U.S. His peak rating was in the 2700s U.S., and FIDE was a little bit below that, but just an incredible player. What was going on in the world then was with the world of chess. Who cares about the rest of the world? Just kidding. But in the world of chess, this was an interesting period. There was disputed world championship at the time, as we've talked about before, and those of you who are longtime chess fans or well-studied chess fans may know, there was a period where there were different factions saying that they controlled who the world championship was, which started when Kasparov and Nigel Short formed a rival faction to FIDE in the 1990s. And then for about 10, 12 years, something like that, there was a period where it was disputed. So in 1999, one world champion, Khalifman, won a FIDE knockout to become world champion in 1999. Khalifman actually gets mentioned in the book a couple times because he, like Yermolinksky, is from St. Petersburg, Russia. He succeeded Karpov as the FIDE world champion. And of course, Kasparov was the Grand Chess Council world champion, which came after the Professional Chess Association, the organization that he founded with Nigel Short. Kasparov, of course, was kind of undisputed as the strongest player in the world still at that point, even though he lost to Kramnik a couple years subsequently. And they were trying to, and Kasparov, one other notable thing about that period, he was trying to organize a world championship match, but he had Alexei Shirov won the right to play him, and that sort of fell through. Same thing happened with an Anand match that fell through, and then finally he played Kramnik later. So that was a lot going on at that time, but it really didn't matter much in terms of Yermolinsky's. I mean, he's played guys like that. I think he played Kasparov 5 times, but his book is more, I don't know, it draws from his whole career back to when he was a youth in St. Petersburg, but it doesn't touch on the elite echelon of chess as much. It's more of, like Bryan said, a personal reflection of his own chess development. So we've already got into Alex's background a little bit, but Bryan, do you want to share a few more biographical details about Yermo, as he's called, or Uncle Yermo?
Yeah, definitely. He was actually the U.S. chess champion a couple times, which if in 1993, he shared first place with Alex Shabalov, and in 96, he was sole champion. He was also has won, in the United States, there's a lot of these large Swisses, like you mentioned, the Continental Chess Tour, and he's won the World Open, I believe it's the largest tournament in the United States, or it has been, and he won it 3 times in 93, 95, 96, and in 99, he shared first place with 9 other players and won. I guess he didn't win the first prize in the playoff against Greg Serper, but it's interesting. Right around that time, he was really winning. Like you mentioned, he was winning everything in sight in the United States. So definitely someone good to learn from, and I think that made his book very attractive at the time.
Yeah, and it was quite refreshing that the book turned out to be so relatable, because I felt like these, at least to me as a teenager, observing the chess world, like getting my feet wet in the chess world, these Soviet emigre grandmasters just they seemed gruff from outside appearances, but he's really very, very funny, self-aware guy. As he talked about when I interviewed him, I mean, he's had jobs in all walks of life. He cleaned the bathrooms when he worked at the Mechanics Institute in San Francisco, as he told me. So very, very humble guy for as brilliant as he is. But so with all that out of the way, let's talk about, before we dig into the sort of the content of the book, for any listeners wondering what level chess player this is a good book. What do you think, Bryan?
Well, I guess I think it would be more past it's a little too heavy for beginners. I would put it, like I said, I was 1500 when I first read it, and now rereading it as an 1850 player, I could see that I think a lot of the advice is very relevant for, say, 1500, 1600 players. But the actual games, some of his analysis, obviously he's writing that these are like from his personal notes. And I think you should be a fairly strong player to fully grasp that. But I definitely think you could get something out of it. Even I would say as low as 1400 plus. So if you studied sort of basic tactics, this book isn't here to teach you about tactics and strategy. It's more about how do you take your games and look at them and how can you use those to improve your chess.
Yeah, well said. And it's pretty timeless in that regard, as we'll talk about in a little bit. Even the opening section, like the actual opening analysis, I'm sure wouldn't withstand the rigors of today's engines without being adjusted. But it's more a teach a man to fish type of book. And I agree, it's challenging, like you say, Bryan, for say someone 1400 or something. But there's definitely nuggets in there. You could definitely read it and learn from it. And then, I think the book's about 300 pages. So, parts of it move faster than others, but definitely anyone would gain a little bit from it. So we're gonna dig into the book in a minute, but first we're gonna take a break and hear from our friends at Chessable. So with the entire chess world focused on the candidates tournament, we wanted to tell you about an awesome free course from Chessable. Super GM Pantala Harikrishna is posting a Game of the Day video for each of the 14 rounds of the FIDE 2020 candidates tournament, and they're also compiling all of the key instructive lessons in one place using Chessable's Move Trainer technology. So after you watch the games, or if you're catching up on the games, chessable.com is a great place to do it, whether you're doing it as the tournament goes on or you're catching up on this podcast later. Highly recommend you go to chessable.com and check out GM Hari Krishna's free candidates course. Okay, and we're back. Bryan, do you want to read? Let's see. So we were going to read the first 2 paragraphs of the book, and then you felt we should add one more paragraph also from the introduction. So how do you want to do this, Bryan? Do you want to take the first 2?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I can do that. Okay, I'll go ahead and read it here from the introduction. The book you're about to read is essentially a collection of Alex Yermolinsky's games and analyses I've made in the course of my everyday work that began a long time ago. Having started to attend a junior chess club at the age of 8, I was marked as a promising kid, but hardly a prodigy. I think in the early stages of my career, my results didn't match the time and effort put in, and I constantly let other kids surpass me. They would quickly jump through the grades up to Category 1 level, while I was taking a year or more for every step. It was the most frustrating thing at the time, but it may have also been a blessing in disguise. I got to play a lot of games against worthy competition, quite a few tournaments in every category, until I was absolutely ready to move on. And having moved up a step, I would already be good enough to compete at the new level, or at least avoid being blown away. This kind of slow rise, even if it's highly atypical for a future grandmaster, has its merits. If anything, it did a good job preparing me for future disappointments and frustrations that essentially make up a lifelong chess career.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, and that really gives you a flavor for what the book's about. And then, Bryan, there was another part later on in the introduction you wanted to read. Is that right?
Yeah. Do you mind if I just...
go for it.
Yeah, basically, I mean, he talks about his career, but I'll read the last couple paragraphs before we get into the meat of the book. The problem I had to acknowledge was the stagnation of my development. I was simply going nowhere. It's not that I lacked experience. I was 28 years old then, and I had been playing chess for some 20 years up to that point. It was rather a sad realization that my game was not improving. In search of inspiration, I decided to follow the most common advice one can find in the works of Alexei, my most favorite player, and Botvinnik, one of my least favorite players, which can be put into simple words. Study your games. Ever since, every game I played has been extensively annotated. Care to take a peek? Be my guest.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and I am glad you added that in because that really gets to the central thrust of the book, Bryan. That's definitely I would say the number one theme. And yeah, and you can see he has a pretty personable writing style. So good stuff. And then the structure of the book. So it's kind of an unusual structure in that it has 3 big chapters, and then there's basically sub chapters. So I'm not going to read the 13 sub chapters there are in total, but I will say there's the 3 big chapters are trends, turning points, and emotional shifts is part 1. Part 2 is openings and middle game structures, and part 3 is tactical mastery and strategical skill. So my favorite subchapter, I feel like this book starts off really strong. Now, Bryan, I think we have different opinions about our favorite parts of the book, but to me, it's like it starts out super strong, and then the part in the middle about the openings, mostly I didn't find it as readable as I remembered. But then it finishes strong as well. My favorite subchapter was the one called Trend Breaking Tools. I'm showing 3 ways to fight against. So an example would be, he's talking about 3 ways to fight against a negative trend in a game. And as I mentioned, Grandmaster Ewan Ludwig Hammer, when he was a guest, he highlighted that he felt like trends in a chess game are an aspect that are sometimes overlooked in terms of how to improve at chess or how to think about the competition, because everyone's always saying, do your tactics, learn your openings, and thinking about sort of the micro skills that you need to have. But chess is a psychological battle. Of course, this is something also touched upon in 7 Deadly Chess Sins by Grandmaster Jonathan Rosen. But GM Yermolinksky, and at this time, I don't feel like this had been written about much at all, but he gives an example to give you a flavor of the kind of thing he writes about. He gives 3 tips to fight against a negative trend in a game. Number 1, put up a stubborn defense. Number 2, create a position where your opponent has a multiple choice of reasonable ideas. So that's an interesting one to me. So basically, he's saying kind of, force your opponent into paralysis by analysis. And number 3, sacrifice material to release the hidden energy of your pieces. And of course, he gives examples of all these. So I really like the psychological stuff in this game, in this book. He's very good about digging into the psychology of breaking through a barrier in your game and what to do against your opponent, what to do against lower rated opponents, all that stuff. Did you have a favorite subchapter, Bryan, or chapter for that matter?
Yeah, I did. I did enjoy that aspect of the book as well, the one that the trend breaking tools, because again, like you, I never read anything like that at the time, and his examples were very, very good. And we could talk more about that later when we get to the favorite games. But with the subchapter, I did enjoy his aspect on opening structures, because I think a lot of amateur players, I guess you could say, we love to study different openings, and we like to talk about openings as if we're as if we're these grandmasters, but he kind of says, instead of trying to memorize all these lines, that you really just need to play it. I think a lot of players feel like they need to be ready before they take their new opening out to the tournament hall. But and again, he's at a different point of view, because he's usually near the top of the charts, I guess you could say, in these weekend Swisses he used to play in. But his view was, play the line, because you actually learn about it and then analyze it. And at the time, the engines weren't as good, so he probably meant analyzing it by himself. And then only after that, then you can check the databases and see where your analysis differs with some of the top players, and using the different New in Chess yearbooks and such. So I kind of liked it. It was sort of a backwards way of doing it than I think a lot of amateur players do, which is maybe to study the book first and memorize it using Chessable, and then they go and play it. And I think you get more of a feel for the opening, or when you experience yourself, when you experience why certain pawn breaks work or certain things. And I really like that he emphasized that. And he does mention, he says, well, this might work for me and maybe not for you. So he does kind of say that you have to find, and I think he says this throughout the book, that you have to find what works for you. But I like that he, and he used examples through, using several of his openings along the way. So I did enjoy that part maybe a little more than you did, but maybe because of the way I tried to learn openings, kind of working through this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a couple things. Number one, my general, I just don't love openings as much as some others, as you know, anyone who's listened to me regularly probably has figured out. So I have my own biases built in, but the more particular bias was I. It was such granular detail that if he wasn't talking about an opening that I played, it was just a little hard for me to dig in. And I'm not saying that makes me like a you know, an exemplary chess student. Like that's to my detriment, but that is how I felt reading it. And I suspect I'm not the only one that would feel that way. So that's sort of my quibble with that chapter. Obviously, if you dig into everything he says and really think about and really break down how he learns little particular nuances in like the Benko, there's a Benoni part, there's Slav stuff. I mean, there's lots of openings touched upon. And I'm sure if even if you don't play it, if you really dig in and understand all the nuances of what he's getting into, you could learn a lot from it. But for me, I found that part difficult, but I still definitely understand the broader point he's making. And I think it's a good one about, you know, trying to learn the thought process of the opening. And I apologize, Bryan, if this is later in the outline, I can't remember. But one quote that really stuck with me was him saying, when he feels that basically you should never play a move that you've memorized in an opening that if you don't know why the move is played. Yeah. So, I mean, that's serious. That's a serious suggestion because it's so, you know, we spend so much time trying to memorize theory, and that's a daunting task if you're going to really try to understand every move. But seeing how he breaks down the openings in this book, you can tell he practices what he preaches. I mean, of course, it helps when you're a 2700 to be able to understand it. But especially in the engine age, if you make it a point to understand every single move, and now the opening books are so good, even better than they were in '99 when Yermo published this. You can understand every move if you put some effort. It's just it takes additional effort, and we all have limited time, of course. But yeah, so definitely a big point of the book. Which brings us to the other themes of the book. So, Bryan, what did you think? What themes did you highlight from this book?
Well, and I think you get this. You mentioned this earlier. Like Yermo's a very likable guy, kind of an everyman, I would say. I mean, obviously he's very good at chess. You know, he's much better at chess than the everyman. But I kind of got this idea that he just kind of worked hard to get everything he got. He's very, very self-reliant in terms of his chess improvement. And so it's sort of that idea that you need to learn to think for yourself, you know, because he talks about some of his coaches, you know, in the Soviet school of chess, and they would tell him, you know, you never do this maneuver, you never do that positionally. And then he would find these games where the analysis showed that the going against the grain was the right thing to do. So he kind of bases a lot of what he's telling us in order for, it's part of the self-discovery and concrete analysis behind that, and that kind of consequently or maybe subsequently leads to the fact that you need to analyze your games and use that as kind of a jumping point to improve your chess.
Yeah, he talks, to be specific, about legendary trainer Vladimir Zak, who discovered Korchnoi and Spassky and all these legends from Leningrad, what is now St. Petersburg. But I mean, he basically says there was no secret sauce. I mean, he doesn't make Zak, he doesn't say anything particularly bad about him, but he doesn't make him sound like this like legendary teacher either. He just says like he was a good judge of talent, and you know, he was always there, sort of thing. So yeah, it's interesting. As for my major themes, I mean, we've already mentioned these, so I'll just keep it short, but just how much we can learn from our own games, even at the strong GM level, and the fact of chess as a psychological struggle at its core. That's something that sort of a theme that runs throughout the book, which I think some of this will come up with our favorite quotes. So I'll Bryan, you want to take this? Like, we'll take turns reading these.
Sure. Do you want me to give my first one, I guess?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Actually, this was very interesting, too. I thought it's on page 66. And he, just to give a little preface, he talks a little bit about learning English as a new language. So later he says, who knows, maybe chess should be observed just like a language should be spoken around you in order to be understood and transformed into a skill. And just a quick note, it reminds me, you had Evgeny Boreev on the podcast, and I remember you talking about him, and he kind of just said, you should be with chess. If you immerse yourself in chess, you'll get better. And it kind of reminded me of that.
Okay. Yeah. And my quote is from the same chapter. That's actually, no, I guess it's from the chapter just preceding it, from my favorite chapter that I mentioned, Trends, Turning Points, and Emotional Shifts. And it's a bit of a long quote here, but indulge me. He says, sorry for the delay. He says, the computing ability varies from player to player, but in general, every strong GM is able to calculate deeply enough when needed. Exactly how deep? Well, it depends. What's the problem? Somebody like Vasily Ivanchuk would say, you just keep giving checks or attack his pieces or create threats any other way, and your opponent's answers are forced, then all you have to do in order to continue is to be able to visualize the resulting positions clearly. Easy for him to say. Visualization is the point where chess players begin to differ from one another, ranked by a degree of natural talent. Visualization is a pattern thing. It's much easier to mentally analyze a game you just finished rather than someone else's. Yet I get surprised every time I try to engage my opponent in a little post-game blindfold talk. Mostly I get a blank stare in return, and even after consulting their score sheets, most of my opponents, I'm talking 2200 strength, not my esteemed GM colleagues, are not able to understand what I'm talking about. It makes me wonder how they can play at all. Probably the same thought has crossed Kramnik and Svidler's mind quite a few times while they watched my feeble attempts to keep up with their blindfold analysis between drinks and Weekend Z bars. Everybody has their place in the hierarchy, but that doesn't mean it's set for all times and there's nothing one can do about it. So yeah, a lot in there. I liked that quote so much that I asked him about when he came on the podcast, I asked him about drinking with Svidler and Kramnik, and he shed a little more light on those tales from the bar. But the broader point, and that might come off as like, I don't know, someone listening without reading the whole book might think it's a little judgmental of people who can't calculate like grandmasters, but I don't think that's the tone he was trying to convey. And it's not the overall tone of the book. It's more just, I think, about the fact that you shouldn't view your visualization skills as a fixed skill. You should work to grow them, and that basically your growth is going to be inhibited if you're not working to grow that.
Right. Yeah, I love that quote as well, but I saw you had it already.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Should I go to my next one here?
Sure. Yeah, go for it. Yeah,
this one is it's in the opening section. And I don't know if I'll read it and then I'll tell you what I got out of it. I will reveal a little secret in this situation. And he's referring to playing someone 300 plus points lower. There's nothing I want more for my opponents than to step away from mainline theory. Go ahead, surprise me, throw me off balance, make me think on my own, any way you call it. But there's a catch. You give me a good position after the first 10 moves with plenty of the pieces of the board, and I'll find a way to outplay anybody 300 ratings points below me. And he's referring here to, I think, when players use sort of dubious openings because they figure, well, I'm playing someone stronger than myself. I have to get him out of his superior knowledge. But he's making a good point here is that he's also just a better chess player. So even if he doesn't know the theory, he's going to be able to work this out. And he's suggesting that you really need to learn to understand your openings. And that goes back into what we were talking about, it not playing any moves that you don't understand.
Yeah, and it is it's a common sort of debate that it raises generally about like whether us, non-professional players should be trying to play sidelines or trying to learn the best openings. And I think it was Sam Shanklin has said like the level, the caliber of your openings should be correlated to the level of your ambition in chess. Mm-hmm. So if you're not like dreaming of being a world champion, then, it's okay to play system openings, the Kali or the London or whatever it may be. But if you are and you're up and coming, then you may not want to do that. And I think, but I think just from a practical point of view, it's definitely a good quote to highlight because he's giving his honest perspective about like if you should try some, far-flung gambit when you're paired up trying to catch someone off guard. And I agree with the advice overall, but I think it's especially true the stronger the player you're playing, the less likely you actually are likely to trip them up with like the wing gambit or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good stuff, Bryan. My next quote is, so I mentioned earlier that I don't love the opening chapter, but I do want to add the caveat that he ties it together. The last 5 pages, he has a section called Final Words on Openings, that I just consider those 5 or 6 pages just to be like an absolute tour de force. So I was kind of dragging through the whole granular analysis of each opening, but then he got to this overall philosophy of the opening, and I just thought this was just like amazing synthesized advice. So if you have the book laying around, even if you've got like the rest of us, a huge pile of chess books and you don't know when you would get back to it, I recommend you pick up it's page 154 if you have the original version like us. But if it's the Kindle, just go to where it says A Final Word on Openings and read those next 5-6 pages. Here's a little snippet from what he says. He says, so that's the way it is. I need to play an opening before I can study it. After I've played it and got a taste of the resulting positions, the lines and variations I saw during the game Sorry, I'm going to restart that sentence. After I played it and got a taste of the resulting positions, the lines and variations I saw during the game would become a basis for future work. I will refer to the theory, of course, but any theoretical recommendations will be taken into account with a certain dash of skepticism, if only because I believe they're based on nothing else but hasty evaluations of someone else's games, often biased by the final result. I know I can't take them for granted without a complete research on my own. The purpose of this research is multifaceted. First, I need some knowledge of openings to stay competitive. Too many players of my generation I have known and used to admire could not make the adjustment to the ever-increasing pace of modern theory and slip back into a simplistic approach of avoiding critical continuations. The price they pay is enormous. Not only do they suffer from getting very little with white out of the opening and or putting themselves into difficult situations with black, most importantly, their chess style begins to change towards dry technical play. These days, you're not going to beat a lot of people by just sitting there waiting for your opponent to self-destruct. An aging chess player must keep rejuvenating himself by constantly sharpening up his opening repertoire. And those who do get rewarded by the amazing longevity of their chess careers. Look at Korchnoi, Timman, and Belyavsky. Their openings are the cutting edge, and that's why they're still a force against the youngsters of today. So that's evergreen advice, and it still applies to if you look at someone like Anand. He would be sort of, I think, he's only 50, but these guys, Timman in particular, was probably around the same age at that time. Great advice about how to approach the opening even as you get older. I mean, he's talking about grandmasters, but I don't think it just applies to grandmasters.
Oh no, I definitely think that this is, in a way, it really, I think it's kind of a timeless advice, because I think that even on an amateur level, we don't need to play our openings at grandmaster level. So if we can understand our own games and analyze them and understand why, certain pawn breaks are made, why you exchanged certain pieces, and just grow that knowledge with each game, we in our own respect, we'll have a more in-depth insight into our openings than our opponents would. So I really enjoyed that part of the book as well.
Yeah, it's really good stuff. And do you have one more quote, Bryan?
It's a short one, but I think it's a really important one. The truth is, this is from page 162. It's from the tactical mastery and strategical skills section. And it says, the truth is, a chess player's main objective is to find good moves. And the last thing he should worry about is attaching them to his, or worse, someone else's theoretical beliefs. And so this one, the preceding section of this book, he was talking about the difference between Tal and Botvinnik, and how Tal, even though he was known as this attacking tactician, and Botvinnik was known as this positional technician, they just kind of bashed at each other. And he said, yeah, maybe sometimes Tal was more of the aggressor, but 90% of the moves were just good moves, and that it was only that 10% of the moves that was different. And basically, as chess players, we should not think to if the position calls for an attack, we should try to make attacking moves, but not think, well, I'm a positional player, so I can't do that. And he does talk about eventually because he talks in the the first chapter about changing the pace of things, and our openings might lead to certain things, but that when it comes down to it, when we're at the board, we should really not worry about what people are thinking about our style or what we think about our style, and really just try to play what we think is the best move.
Yeah, definitely good advice, which I think has become even more obvious, 20 years down the line, with these engines sort of preaching anti-dogma, and, the top players always preventing each other's plans before they can happen, and so on and so forth. Okay, on to favorite games, Bryan. So I could have picked a couple from this, and again, it's cool that he's picking, he first started to ascend as a chess player, Yermolinksky did, when he was like co-champion of the city of St. Petersburg at the age of 15. And he's got games dating back to then, but then through his whole career, of course, he's played legends like Yusupov and Kasparov over the years, and the Yusupov game at least is in there, and pretty memorable how he writes about that. So there's a lot of good stuff there. But my favorite game was one against, I think he's now a grandmaster. He was an IM at this time, Igor Helmanetsky, in the 95 U.S. Championship. And it's in for the opening chapter. And it's a Benoni hybrid type setup. Black doesn't play D6. So Yermo gets to play both D5 and then E5. Pushing the knight back. So it's just a sort of classic, like take the center, and then Helmanetsky castles, and Harry the H pawn marches down the board, and kind of crushing cool win by Yermo. And he talks in the book periodically about how it's, touching on the quote that Bryan previously read about how he's more of a positional player, but you wouldn't know it seeing some of the games like this. And that just, again, and also listening to him talk about the importance of playing blindfold and visualizing, players of this caliber are just good at every aspect of the game. And this is a fun attacking game.
Oh, absolutely. I played through that game as well after I saw that was your favorite game. And I thought, I'll have to pick a different game because this as wonderful as this one is, I'll pick it. But I love it because he, people, this is 20 years ago, but he really was. And like you said, with the internet wasn't as big. I mean, he was all over the place. And some of these games in here, even though he does put some of his losses in here as well, which I give him a lot of credit for. But there are some beautiful games in here, including this one.
Yeah, and I like the one you picked too. So let's hear more about it, Bryan.
Yeah, let me get to my notes here on it. I picked this one. I play the Sicilian on hand, and even though it's a slightly different variation, what I liked about it is, this one just had a lot of things in it. It had a lot of the Sicilian themes in there in terms of the queenside attack by black, kind of this, and this happens in the Najdorf and several variations where the pawn structure in the middle gets a little jumbled up, and then black can't castle because his kingside pawn structure is a little busted. But it's kind of I believe this is in the trend-setting chapter, the psychology, and he talks about one of his ways is to sacrifice material to unleash the energy, and he does a pawn sacrifice, a classic D6, D5 pawn break. And even though he's a pawn down, now his rook gets out, and it really he's able to trade down into I think he wins the exchange, and eventually into a favorable end game. And it's one of those games where it was kind of messy at the end. Like sometimes you see these games where the person loses the exchange and then they resign because they just are confident that their opponent's technique is going to go forward. But here, he's playing another grandmaster, and he keeps playing on, and he chases his king around with his queen and his bishop, and eventually gets to a point where I believe he was either going to win his opponent's queen or checkmate him. So I just thought it was a really great game. And the notes, the one thing, and we mentioned this before, the notes and his personal thoughts during the game that he shares are just wonderful.
Yeah, and this is, of course, against Johan Hjartarson, Icelandic chess legend who's been on the show. Mm-hmm. Great guy and amazing player, and first board of the Olympiad, if I'm not mistaken. I believe they were first board. So just titans colliding, big stakes. Pretty cool game for sure. Okay, improvement takeaways again. We've touched on these before, but still can't hurt to mention them again. So, Bryan, how would you bullet point the improvement takeaways for our listeners?
Yeah, I'll be concise. Of course, the first thing is obviously you need to analyze your own games. That's what this book is all about. Learn about what moves to make and what corrections, but also understand your emotional state and understand how you can change that during the game. I also got having a critical eye about what you read. So when you're studying the classics, as much as some of these old books are very explanatory, do your own research, do your own analysis. Don't worry about style. If you think yourself I always joke about this when I'm talking to other players who are, my rating or lower, is that, our style is blundering some or blundering more, and not really tactical or strategic or positional. So don't worry about that and really just learn about getting better at it. And don't worry about the arbitrary demarcations of a player's knowledge and skill. And then basically with the opening, kind of flip it backwards, play the game, play it, learn it inside out, and then work from there.
Yeah. All excellent points. And mine are basically the same thing about just how indispensable it is to analyze your own games. I mean, think about Yermolinksky. He's got all his games from when he was 15 years old. I mean, they weren't being published in Informants, that's just how he rolled. So it's definitely something one can take about it. And I can't remember who, apologies to whoever wrote or said this, but someone has talked about the importance of just treating yourself like a chess player. Like, no matter what your level is, if you're not like cataloging your games and analyzing them, then no one else is going to. So, so it's, it's gratifying in that sense as well. Like, I know when I was a kid, I was one of these, first of my friend, Greg Shahadi, he was hilarious because, I mean, he was hilarious in many ways, but he never had a scorebook, and he always wrote on score sheets, and then he would just crumble them up and put them in his pocket. So when he would come home from a tournament, he would just empty his pockets, and there would just be a pile of crumbled score sheets, and this is how he kept his games. Oh, wow. And he wasn't, then compiling them into like some beautiful database with annotated notes or anything. I mean, of course, he did have his dad to look at the games with him, which helped Senior Master Mike Shahadi, but not treating his games like sacrosanct things, although he probably remembers all his games anyway. But so I did keep scorebooks, but I've lost a lot of my games over the years, like basically almost all of them from my teenage years. And I definitely regret it, not because they were any, like, I mean, there's one or two that I would be proud of, but overall more, it's just, you can sort of see your evolution of a chess player, warts and all in many cases, but still, I really wish I had at least the scores, let alone like annotations of what I was thinking at the time. That would be awesome to have. So definitely strong advice that I think comes from this book, especially for you younger players who can avoid the mistakes that I at least made. And then echoing your advice about don't be scared to learn about openings and to experiment with openings in order to learn them. And chess is a psychological game. Never forget that you're playing another flawed human. So yeah, and we're belaboring these points, but he hits them in a lot of different ways. So definitely recommend the book strongly. Yeah, it holds up very well. And overall, how useful would you say it is for chess improvement on a scale of 1 to 10, Bryan?
I gave it a 9 out of 10. I thought it was very good. Of course, I think if you're, it does take work, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it definitely is, for me, it was very valuable.
Yeah, I gave it an 8 out of 10. So I'm basically right there with you. And even if, again, my primary goal, at least at this moment, isn't chess improvement. So even if chess improvement isn't your goal, I mean, there's enough anecdotes in here and stuff like that make it fun to read. And as a chess philosophy book sort of thing, it's good stuff. So good for a wide range of potential readers. So what did you come up with for any quibbles with the book, Bryan?
Well, let's see here. I think one of the things I did feel, he has so much in the book, and there's different little pieces of advice, but he's very, kind of he's kind of ponderous at times. It is a kind of a self-reflective book, and he kind of writes things, but I'm not sure he quite made an outline before he started writing each chapter. And it's not that I'm not saying that takes away from it, but I think sometimes I had to dig to get the nuggets of wisdom from the chapter. So that was one of them. And then my only other quibble, there is a chapter on computer chess, and it's like 3 pages long, and I felt that he just sort of added that on the end because this really is the beginning of computers being somewhat strong. Other than that, like I said, it's one of my favorite books.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of quibbles either. And yeah, the computer chess, it definitely doesn't seem like it fits in with the overall book, but still it's kind of like reading an essay about chess computers in 1999. So in that respect, it's kind of an interesting historical document. He talks about stuff ranging from the fact that, and many other people have pointed this out, when Kasparov lost to Deep Blue, he didn't think it was actually stronger than him yet. But to his credit, he did see the writing on the wall at the time of writing the book that it was only a matter of time before computers would supplant humans. But certainly in today's engine age, it's not. You wouldn't. There's better resources to read about today's computers, but that's no knock on him. Otherwise, I mean, obviously, it seemed to say this every month. An ebook would be great. I can't speak to the quality of the Kindle book since I didn't get it. I will say I would give this like a B+ on the number of diagrams, especially for a book published 20 years ago. I feel like it has more diagrams than most. So you can, I mean, of course, it's better to set up a set or use a app or tablet to play through the games as you go. But it is a book that you can read in bed, and only, you're only sacrificing, say, 30% of what you could get out of the book, as opposed to some books where it's like 75, 80% if you're not playing through the moves. And the analysis is deep. So this isn't really a quibble, but I mean, if you're really, really going to study this book, just be ready for some hard work. But I do think that it is hard work that would pay off.
I agree.
And I think that's about it, Bryan. So what would our closing remarks be about the Road to Chess Improvement by Grandmaster Alex Yermolinksky?
Well, I just saw this as it's kind of like a very strong player, just kind of opening up his notebook and sharing his secrets. It's like he opened up. He has all these notebooks of his games that he's ever since he was a young boy, and he just takes out the nuggets and shows us this is what I did to get over these problems. And I really thought it's sort of one of those things where if you're willing to do the work like he did, you'll see. Maybe you might not become a grandmaster, but you'll definitely improve your game if you can put in that hard work.
Yeah, so well done by Uncle Yermo. I hope he writes another book. So, I mean, he wrote one book subsequently.
It was an opening book, I think. It was.
Yeah, I think so too. And it was about Sicilian. 6 years later.
Yeah, it was like,
he's not playing as much these days, and he's doing a lot of, he does a show, I think, for the Internet Chess Club.
Yes.
Of course, he's done some announcing gigs. So he's around, but it would be great, Alex, if you catch wind of this, if you could write another book like this. We'll buy it and read it.
Definitely. And we'll have another podcast about it.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And Bryan, you are yet another generous soul who has volunteered to donate the moderate payment I would be willing to give you for guest co-hosting. So where am I going to be sending this money?
It's going to be East Aurora Chess. And actually, it's a local chess club, fairly new. I'm one of the founding members. I'm not I'm not the organizer, but I am one of the first members. And we kind of have a neat mission, and I'm not sure if it's our official mission statement, but we're looking to develop chess for people as a lifelong activity. So it's not just about a lot of organizations promote scholastic chess, which I think is great, but we're looking for, someone who learned chess when they were a kid, never really studied it, but just wants to come and enjoy the game and maybe play with, a buddy, make some new friends. I kind of call us like the cheers of chess, where everyone knows your name. And that's the organization that, I'd love to see a donation go towards. And it is again, it's the club where I play, but it's a new club, and it's just great to see. You have soccer moms who come play, and it is you have a couple guys who came recently from the senior center who saw one of our signs up, and again, these aren't hardcore competitive players, but we also a couple national masters came in, and so we get a neat mix, and it's neat to see this. Kind of see this collaboration between really strong competitive players and really what you would call casual players who have no desire to become competitive players. And I think it's great, and we're trying to encourage both groups to show up.
That's cool, Bryan. You got to love the grassroots chess, and the discerning Perpetual Chess listener might note that it was Bryan who, when I interviewed tournament director Michael Reagan, it was Bryan who sent in a question about organizing tournaments for a small chess club with disparate ratings. So now it all makes sense, Bryan.
Oh yeah, and that if I could just briefly, I did run my first event, and I followed Michael's advice, and I had 2 sections, and it went really well.
Okay, good to hear. Yeah, Michael knows his stuff, so not too surprising. Okay, so Bryan, I'm gonna do the blindfold puzzles, but I'll record that separately. So I would like to thank you for your time again, especially under the circumstances. And listeners, I hope you guys and girls ladies, women are hanging in there as well. It's it's a difficult time. But that's what times like this, it's nice to have an escape in chess. So, but Bryan, thanks again.
Thank you, Ben. I really appreciate it.
All right, guys, I am back to give you the blindfold chess puzzles of the month. Before I do that, I wanted to check to see if you guys are actually doing these puzzles. I know that a lot of people are enjoying the book podcast overall, but I just want to make sure that people are actually doing these because they're kind of a lot of work. So if you look forward to these puzzles, please drop me a line, email, Twitter, Facebook group, and let me know. The other thing is, and while you're at it, let me know about the audio quality of this episode, as I mentioned earlier. And last but not least, I decided to do something different with this month's blindfold puzzle, and I'm going to give you games from the starting position. So I'll reel off the moves from the starting position, and then you tell me, and then you try to find the best move in that position. So while you're at it, you can also let me know if you are doing the puzzles, if you prefer this, or you prefer the setup puzzles as we've been doing in the past, or if you like a mix, would be helpful to know. Okay, with all that out of the way, guys, here comes, probably you're sitting at home this time, given the coronavirus. So here comes a blindfold puzzle for you. Coming from the starting position, it is going to be white to move, find the winning move for white. So it goes e4, black plays c5, c3, black plays knight c6, white plays d4, black plays b6, white plays knight f3, black plays e6, white plays bishop to b5, black plays knight on g to e7, white plays knight on b to d2, black plays bishop b7, white plays knight to c4, black plays pawn to a6. It is white's move. Find the best move. I'll repeat it, and I'll go a little slower this time. Also, I'll, of course, list the moves in the show description. So if you didn't catch them all, you can look at the list of moves without seeing the answer, and then you can click through to the answer. So here we go one more time, slower. It's going to be white to move and win after the following 7 moves. e4, c5, c3, knight c6, d4, b6, knight to f3, e6, bishop b5, knight on g to e7, knight on b to d2, black plays bishop to b7, white plays knight to c4, and then black plays a6. and it is white to move and win. On to puzzle number 2. This one is going to be black to move and win material. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, D4, EXD4, NXD4, Queen F6, knight takes C6, Queen takes C6, Queen E2 for white, and then black plays Bishop C5, white plays Knight C3, black plays Knight E7, white plays Queen F3, black plays Knight G6, white plays Bishop C4, black plays Knight E5, white plays Queen E2. And it is black to move and win material with a forcing sequence. So I'll read it once more, a little bit slower. Going to be black to move and win material. This puzzle I think is slightly harder than the first one. Okay, E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6. White plays D4, black plays ED4, white plays knight takes D4, black plays Queen F6, white plays knight takes C6, black plays Queen takes C6, white plays Queen E2, black plays Bishop C5, white plays knight to C3, black plays knight to E7, white plays Queen to F3, black plays knight G6, white plays Bishop to C4, black plays knight to E5, and white plays Queen to E2. And it is then black to move and win material with a forcing sequence. So that is it for this month's chess book recaptured. I forgot to mention earlier, but I already have next month's scheduled. Friend of the podcast, Neil Bruce, will be joining me, and we'll be discussing 2 books. We're going to discuss 2 of the tactics studying philosophy books, just in case any of you have lots of time to be studying chess. We're going to talk about Rapid Chess Improvement, which is sort of a controversial tactics manifesto from the early 2000s, and the famous and universally loved Woodpecker Method. So Neil will be joining me to discuss those 2 books as long as life doesn't get too far in the way for either one of us. So you guys can look forward to that next month. Thanks again for listening, and I hope everyone's hanging in there. Okay, bye. Thanks, as always, to my producer, Matthew Passy, for making Perpetual Chess happen. I also want to thank all you guys and girls who helped me grow Perpetual Chess. That includes everyone who tells a friend about the show, everyone who writes a positive review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, whatever other podcast platform you may be on. All of it is appreciated, and all of it keeps me going. But of course, most of all, I want to thank the people who provide financial support to the show. I would like to give extra special thanks to the following people and entities. They are Chessable Quality Chess Books, the Capital City Chess Club, the Apprend Chess Twitch channel, Andrew Bach, Austin Clough, Benjamin Porto, Kathy Carr, Chad Oliver, Dan O'Hanlon, Danny Davidson, David Schreiber, I am Dimitri Schneider, Faraz Sawaf, Gary Foreman, Greg Natel, Greg Shahadi, Guven Manet, Jens Green, John Jernigan, John Cromarty, John McCarthy, Kelly Palmer, Kevin O'Callaghan, Lone Pine Chess, Lorraine Dore, Lucio Casada Silva, the law offices of Stuart Katz, Michael Kahn, FM Michael Oplin, Mike Zelazny, Moonmaster 9000, Peter Sodi, Reuven Fisher, Seattle Chess Club, Thomas Stanix, Thomas Tachenko, Todd Bryant of Strong Chess, and Todd Kennedy. And I would also like to thank the following people and entities. They are Aaron Waffler, Ace Vallega, Adam Ralph of ChessEngland.com, Adrian Gutierrez, Alex Pejas, FM Andrei Terakov, Andrew Perry, Better Chess Training, Bill Juniper, Bill Moran, Brad and Andy Rosen, Brett Howard Lynn, Brian Mullish, Chad Hilton, Dr. Charles Snodgrass, Chris Flanagan, Chris Wainscott, Christopher Baumgartner, Christopher Chabris, Chris Lott, Christopher Wood. I am Christoph Zalecki, aka Chess Explained, Coach J's Chess Academy, Courtney Fry, Daniel Gell, Daniel Ginsberg, Daniel Lucas of U.S. Chess Federation, Daniel Naylor, Dave Saylor, David Cramley, CEO of Chessable.com, Dalen Shelton, Dwayne Edmonds, Ethan Smith. I am Elect Donnie Ariel, the Fox Valley Chess Club of Aurora, Illinois, Dr. Frank Tortoris, Gary Andrews, Gary Lewis, Geert Vandervelt, Gerard Barta, Giovanni Russo, Hans Schut, Harish Srinivasan, James Aspinwall, James Benastia, James Moore, Jason Anfang, Jason Woolham, J. Deep Chakrabarty, Jeff Anderson, Jeffrey Martello, Jerry Wells, J.J. Stranad, John Fernandez, John Fontaine, John Hartman, John Jeffrey, John McMurtry, Jordan Goodwin, Jose Rodriguez, Justin Gardner, Jen Shahadi, Joel Rocky, John Thompson, GM Josh Friedel, I am Kare Christensen, WGM Katerina Nemtsova, Kelly Palmer, I am Kostya Kovutsky, Krishna Kapala Krishnan, Larry Ryforth, Laura Belyavsky, Martin Knudsen, Matthew Passy, Matthew Tedesco of SeattleChessMeetup.org, the Mechanics Institute Chess Club of San Francisco, Michael Allard, Miguel Arospidi, Mike Clem, Mr. Mike Shahadi, Nate Salon, Neil Bruce, Olaf Mueller-Michaels, GM Pascal Charbonneau, Passy Passanen, Paul Bain, Paul Clarkson, Paul Sweeney, Paulo Santana, Peter Lux, Peter Merrifield, Randy Temple, Ricky Grahalver, Roy Yearwood, Ryan Berg, the Say Chess YouTube channel, Scott Doherty, Scott McKinnon, Sebastian Finsterwalder, WGM, Tatya Vabrahamian, Tim Brennan of TacticsTime.com, Tim Seymour, Timothy Ha, Tom Edsel, Tomas Komanich, Tony Rotella, Tyrin Price, Victor Vrankulj, Wayne Beam, William Brock, William Juniper, William Peterson, FM Zhao Cheng of Chess1000.com, Zhivko Stoyanov, and that is everyone. Thanks, everyone. Catch you guys next week.